Today is August 23rd in 2021. I'm sitting here with Marguerite Clark, and we're participating in an American history, Arizona, Tempe history. 150th anniversary, if they have a name for that. But Marguerite, you're a graduate of high school in 1958 in Tempe High School, right?
Correct.
Tempe Union High School. And I would like to cover the history of Tempe. We'll do a couple of different things. What was your high school year? What were your high school years like, and your grade school years, if you were here in Tempe, which I don't think you were?
Yeah, I was for junior high at Tempe Elementary.
Okay, very good. So, start by telling us your name.
Well, my name is really Marguerite, and that's the only name I have. But if you go around Tempe, you'll still run into a Harry Mitchell, and Ray Aguilar's now gone, and Gail Aguilar's here, a bunch of people. They call me Betty, and that is not my name. And I said, and it goes back into childhood, how I wound up when my mother registered me at Tempe Grammar for 7th grade. She told them to call me Betty, but she registered me as Marguerite Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's also not my name. And then my last name was Van Kirk, and then I married an abusive man by the name of Drobnewski.
Okay, we'll get to your life afterwards, because you've had an interesting life.
I have.
But I'm interested in what was going on in Tempe. When you came, you were how old? The first time you came, in what year?
49.
And you were 9 years old at that time?
Yes.
And you stayed, how long were you here?
We were only here 2-3 months.
And did you go to school during that time?
Yes.
And that was at which school?
Actually, they registered me at Baltz.
Okay, the Balt School in Phoenix, which was
Yes.
at 44th Street and Van Buren
Yes.
at the time. And do you know why that happened?
I know why, because it involved my father's, gonna get a job or something.
Okay. So the Balt School was at the edge of Tempe and the edge of Phoenix.
Right.
So, but you didn't stay long in 1949. Then you moved to Florida, back to San Diego, Florida, and now back to
Arizona, San Diego, and then back to Florida.
Okay. And then, but you came back to Tempe in what year?
1950, what was it, 7th grade. What would that be, 51, 52?
Okay. And where did you live in 1951, or when you came back?
Let me see. The first time we lived on Apache Boulevard when it was Highway 60, and my father ran the Fireside Cafe. And then he gave that up, and then the campus homes were built, and we moved to the campus homes at the corner of 17th and Farmer.
And what's the address there? Do you remember?
1608 Farmer Avenue.
South Farmer, right?
Yeah, and my phone number was Woodland 7 3500.
3500?
Yeah.
Excuse me. So that neighborhood, who were your neighbors?
See, behind me were the Bakers and William Baker, Bill Baker, and he worked for APS. And next door was Jerry Shea, and he was a master sergeant at Williams Air Force Base. Across the street was Al Kitts and his family, and he was with, wasn't he with also APS? And then catty corner from me was Walter Richens. When those homes got built, not them, they came a little later. Our house was started in 52, and Richens' house was started in about 54. And Walter lived catty corner from me. And then on the other side of me, across the street, was an older couple with no children, and they would get in fights at 4 in the morning, and you could hear the dishes breaking against the wall. And we called her Pinky because she always wore pink. That's all I know about her.
Well, you mentioned two names that are familiar to me for sure, Walter Richens
Right.
and the Baker family, who had a daughter named Nona.
Nona, yes.
That's correct, okay. So who did you play with in that?
I didn't. I
any
didn't
kids?
have time.
Okay. So your life was basically taking care of your family, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Helping your mother deal with the younger brother?
Yes. My youngest brother was 38 years old before he realized I was not his mother. I'll never forget that day. He came to my driveway on Broadmoor and Rural, and he had a little green Volkswagen, and he was getting ready to leave, and he stood there with his arms on the Volkswagen door, and he says, "She's my mother. She's my mother." And that was the day he realized I wasn't his mother, because he only saw mother on Sundays, because I had to be home from school every day, clockwork at 4 o'clock so she could go to work. And so we only saw her on Sunday. She'd get up at 9, she'd fix us a lovely dinner, she was a good cook. And so, Terry would go off and play with Timmy Royce or somebody else. So she was like a guest in our house.
So your childhood was busy as an adult, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But you went to school. What school did you go to?
I went to Tempe Grammar, 7th and 8th, and then I went to Tempe High for 4 years.
The grammar school was known as what?
Tempe Elementary, I think.
8th Street School?
No.
The 10th Street School.
10th Street School.
So you went to the 10th Street School,
Right.
which is the newer of the two schools.
Right.
Okay. Do you remember who your teachers were?
Yes, Mr. Baines was 7th grade, and Mr. Fees was 8th grade, and I loved them both for this reason. When I was in 5th grade in Florida, I quit growing. I was 4'11" and a half and weighed about 62 pounds. And then I stayed at 4 feet 11 and a half inches. The rest of 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and freshman year in high school, I never grew, but I did get fat. I went from about 62 pounds to 152 pounds. And so in 7th grade, I had this classmate by the name of Jerry Moore, who was spoiled rotten because his grandfather had been governor of Arizona. And he would sit in class and call me pig slop and pimple puss, because my brother and I both had severe acne, severe. And so Mr. Baines used to do everything he could to not have me in class. And when I got to 8th grade, Mr. Fees, I was off teaching the little guys how to do whatever. I was in charge of the school banking system. I had a wonderful, really, I didn't realize how short and ugly I was. And I tolerated it, but Mr. Fees later told me in later years, he said, "You were a very bright student." And he said, "I admired you for that." And he says, "You didn't need to be in class to learn anything." And so I would, like in charge of the banking system on Fridays, I was never in class because the kids could deposit their nickels and dimes in their little bank accounts. It was teaching them math. And so I was in charge of all that by myself, singly. And then on Mondays, I would go and I would audit all the accounts. I wasn't in class again. And then on Tuesdays, I would take a bank that said First Interstate, a gauze-colored bank bag that had First Interstate on it, and I'd take all the money. I'd go into the office, and I would tell Mr. Holderman or Mrs. Virginia, the nurse. I'd tell one of them, "I'm going to the bank now," and I would leave campus by myself with a bank bag. And I would walk down, you'll love this one, I would walk down Forest because I could get to go behind the high school gym and watch the boys, or I would go down Mill, or I'd go down Maple to get to First Interstate at 6th and Mill.
It was First National at that
First
time.
National, okay. And yes, you're right. And so I would deposit the money and then come back to school. Well, that took care of all of Tuesday. So I had Wednesday and Thursday only ever in class. And then one time I remember one of my classmates, I walked into class and her desk was kind of in the middle of our classroom, and Mr. Fees had probably a good 30 students. And I walked into class and her name was Karen Hansen, and she said, "If you would only eat carrots and celery like me, you wouldn't be so fat." And Mr. Fees went over and got her desk and hauled it over to his and put it right next to his desk, and that's where she had to sit from thereafter. And so then that was my 8th grade year, and they were great teachers, and they really protected me, which I did not realize till I was an adult. And
Well, you've mentioned a couple of things now. Names, Mr. Holderman was the principal, I take it.
yes, Pop.
Okay. And you're describing a fairly difficult childhood where you were bullied.
Oh yeah.
And we'll talk later about your success in life as you've become a very successful woman now. So when you were, as part of your functions with your family, you did some of the business transactions for your mother, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
for your parents.
I had
What
to.
did that involve in terms of the businesses in Tempe at that time?
Well, Mom would give me cash, I don't know, and I would get on my bicycle and I'd go downtown, Mill Avenue, and run around to the different places. I know she had a loan with somebody, some loan company, and there was APS, and that's where Mr. Ziegler and I would always talk. And I mean, I got to know all the adults around town, kind of.
So what were the businesses that you remember on Mill Avenue?
Oh God, I remember a lot of them. My favorite was, well, I had more than one favorite. My very, very favorite was Dutch Oven, because I could have 8 cents and go in there and buy a cinnamon crisp. Oh my God, I loved them. They made the best.
And where was the Dutch Oven?
The Dutch Oven was between 6th and 7th Street on the west side, and it was near the furniture store. I know Bill Steffen's parents, father ran that for a while, and it was down the street from the Yankee Doodle and the Cow Palace. And oh God, it's going
So
back.
where was the Cow Palace?
Cow Palace was on 6 on the west side of Mill, on south side of 6th Street,
On the alley.
on the alley.
Also, did that become the Dairy Queen?
You know, I don't know. The only Dairy Queen I ever knew was the one that was on Joe Clark's parents' property at 10th and Mill.
Okay. So the Cow Palace, what was the Cow Palace?
It was a milk store. You'd go in there and you could buy milk in glass jars. And I always bought, I think we bought just quarts and half gallons, I think, in glass jugs. I remember that. That's all I remember buying there.
Okay. And that was for your family. You would do the shopping there for.
Yes.
You also mentioned earlier the Lamb's Market.
Yes. I'm trying to remember where that was at, because I remember where the last one was on Roosevelt and University on the southwest corner.
But Roosevelt and University, the word university didn't exist.
No, it was 8th Street. It was 8th Street at that time.
Okay.
And then Ronnie's Auto was across the street. And I remember because Mom always took her car to Ronnie's Auto for maintenance. And then a time or two I went to the Rollins grocery store, and it seemed like usually the boys were in there quite a bit. And then I heard, I shouldn't tell what I heard was the rumor, so I wouldn't shop there anymore. And there was a rumor about what one of the older boys, not Norman, who was in my class, but one of the older boys one time, and so I wouldn't go there to shop anymore, because I used to shop meats there. That's all I ever shopped, and I don't know if they had more.
And then up and down Mill Avenue, you went to the APS store, which
Yeah.
was at 5th Street and Mill.
Mill, yes. And I don't know where the little finance place was. It was somewhere near the House of Toys, TP of Toys. Remember TP of Toys and Firestone? They were on the east side of Mill. between 8th Street and I think 7th Street, right in there. And I think Dr. Lopiano may have had a chiropractor office right in there.
He was across the street, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Was the Western Auto Store there?
Yeah, not Firestone, Western Auto, that was it, yes.
Okay.
And I remember that was my second experience of ever seeing TV, because we didn't have TV. And so that was my second experience, standing there looking in the window at TV.
So you were up and down Mill Avenue paying your mother's bills,
Right.
you said. So this is during your 8th grade, 7th and 8th grade school.
No, it was after my father left. So that would be, my experience of Mill Avenue was in 8th grade, taking the school banking funds to First National.
Okay.
And I didn't pay, I'll be very honest, when I would leave the school with the bank bag, like I said, go down Forest, I was interested in the high school boys, go down Mill, I never really paid too much attention. I never stopped to anything. I never bought anything, just went to the bank and got back to school. Or when I'd go down Maple, I went down there to look at, some of the houses, and I know David Caraway lived down there, and there were some other, families that I knew along there. And then I'd go to the bank pretty much then, but I didn't become really aware of the stores and things until I had the responsibility of paying Mom's bills.
And that happened after your dad left,
Mm-hmm.
and your father was an abusive father.
Yes.
And there was a circumstance, and then he was no longer in your life.
Right.
Okay, so now you moved on to high school.
Okay.
And you started high school. Did you go to the old high school?
No. I think my class was the second class to fully attend the new high school. I think the class of 56 was the first class at the new high school, is my understanding. But they didn't finish. They started there, but they didn't spend 4 years. And it was either the class of 57 or the class of 58 that spent 4 years there. I don't know the history of that real well. I loved the old high school. And there's a Jimmy Stewart movie that it reminds me of old original downtown between 10th Street and 8th Street. That's where the old high school was. And the front of it was a lot of shrubbery and an arbor, is that what they call it, with the vines growing over it? And that was the entrance on Mill Avenue to the old high school from the front. And there's a Jimmy Stewart movie every time I see it. And that reminds me of Old Tempe High. And I love the twofer stone that the school was made out of. I thought it was a beautiful school. And I'm sorry I didn't get to go to it.
But you were in that building, I take it.
I went there when after the fire, and it was abandoned.
Right. Then the fire was sometime after it was closed.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you go to high school, and you refer to the new high school, which is where the current high school sits.
Mill and Broadway.
Okay. And do you remember your experiences as a freshman?
Yes. I remember I had Mr. Pomeroy for science. And
Who was the principal? Was it Mr. Benedict?
Yes, it was Mr. Benedict, you're right. He was a nice man.
And Haskell Henshaw?
Oh, he was a super guy. I had him for history somewhere along the way.
Do you know his family history, of course?
No.
His grandfather was an Arizona Ranger.
Oh.
Okay,
No.
so I'm sorry.
No, I didn't know that.
So
All I
Palmer-
know is he was a very, very, I always thought he was a very elegant man.
He was. So, and Mr. Boyle was an assistant principal. So, Pomeroy was your science teacher. How about English? Do you remember the
I think
English
it
teacher?
was Mrs. Linkshite, and she refused to call me Betty, and she would always say, I'll never, Elizabeth!
Oh, even though your name was Marguerite.
Marguerite. She always pulled up what was, at that time, everybody thought was my middle name, and so did I. until I got to college. And so at any rate, yeah, I remember probably, I don't remember, I know I got it in I kept a scrapbook, but the reason I remember it so well, because I was still short and fat, and I kind of became aware of that because of Jerry Moore, and so I just hid out. And I remember that when any of the kids were sick at home, and Mom would leave for work at 10 o'clock, and she usually came back at 2 in the afternoon, 1:30 or 2, take a nap, and then go back at 4, and I had to be home dead nuts 4. But if any of the kids were sick, back then, Tempe High, there were only 4 units, and the intercom system went to all the classes. And so they'd come over and I didn't know this till later on. Gail Aguilar was the one who told me. So they'd come over the intercom and say, Betty Van Kirk, get your stuff together. You got to go home and take care of your brothers or sister or whatever else. And I would leave. And then Gail Aguilar sometime during my end of my school years there, she told me, she says, well, about the intercom system, she said, it's so good that they can key it into a room and not do the whole school. And that's when I found out it went everywhere. And so at any rate, that's one of the things I remember. And,
so were you engaged in any high school activities?
Not my freshman year, no. Okay. And then when I got to be a sophomore, yes, I got into Y-Teens. I got into GAA, providing I was home by 4 o'clock, and I was an awesome archery. I could hit that bullseye every time, but because I had to be home at 4 o'clock, I couldn't do intramurals. And I took PE all 4 years, and I was on the pre-college deal, doing the so many years of science, math, foreign language, and that was sophomore years when I started to join. I did GAA, I did Y-Teens. I eventually wound up being president of Y-Teens. And I think they were the only two. I'd like to belong to the annual club because I enjoy books and that kind of stuff. But because they had unusual hours, I couldn't do it.
Do you remember who the librarian was?
Yes, Mrs. Bernard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your high school years, you have fond memories of your high school years?
They were great. I mean, I go to school and I was a good student. I was in honor society. I'll never forget the day they called my name in the gym, and I was surprised. But I mean, I never aimed for it or anything. I just did. Probably my fondest memory is senior English with Mrs. Hurley. And in that class, back then they grouped us by ability. I think they probably did in your class too, since you're only a year behind me. We were grouped by our intelligence and maybe where our goals were. And in that class, I had a number of the more top students. I had David Caraway, Buell Wetmore, Kathy Clark, Sue Clarkson, Sherman Axel. I love Sherman. He sat across from me. He used to write me little notes. And we used to have the chairs that had the little the little arm on it to write. And those chairs are not made for left-handers. At least we didn't have any. They were all right-handed. So somewhere toward the second semester, we were taking a test, and Mrs. Hurley came by, and she says, Marguerite, have you been left-handed all year? I'm a pure left-hander. That was so funny because I don't write like left-handers with an upper loop. I write, I've had too many hand surgeries now to where my writing does kind of take a slant. But in my younger days, you could not tell I was a left-hander in my writing. And then the other reason I remember her with such fond memories, at the end of the last of the deal, we had to do a 10-page term paper. And we got to select our topic. And I selected the Okefenokee Swamp. And I turned my paper in. And when she turned it back to me, she called me up to her desk. I mean, it almost brings tears to my eyes still. She calls me up to her desk and she says, Marguerite, she says, I do hope you select journalism for your career. She says, I love your stuff. And she says, I always put your report on the bottom of the pile because when I get to it, I know that I'm done, and also it's going to be very interesting to read. I thought that was their greatest compliment.
Well, Marguerite, in these answers that you're giving, you prompt many more questions. Some of these we'll have to have in private conversations because I don't know, have you ever been to the Okefenokee Swamp?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, living in Florida, yes.
In Waycross, Georgia, well, not necessarily.
Well,
you can live
no.
in Georgia and not go to the Okefenokee Swamp. It's way, way, way out there.
I
All
only
right.
saw the Florida part of it, which is nothing compared to the real.
I'm going to move you back to Tempe. Your high school class and that English class you're talking about, Buell Wetmore.
Right.
Do you know where his family's farm was?
Well, I know they were on Baseline Road, and I'm going to tell you what the gossip was, that Buell was just a little snotty rich kid, and it was actually his grandmother that was the source of everything.
Well, the Wetmore farm was west of what is now I-10.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
David Caraway, you've mentioned his name twice. Do you know, can you recant the story of David Caraway?
I can tell you everything about David Caraway
because for people who don't know, he was a fixture in Tempe
yes.
for not all the right reasons.
Right.
So what happened to David Caraway?
Between my freshman and sophomore year, my mother had taken me back to Boston to figure out why I wasn't growing. And they didn't really have a solution for me. And so at any rate, between my freshman and sophomore year, when I had to start being the deliverer of all the bills and everything, my mother bought me a bike. And it was an English racer type bike. It was burgundy with mother of pearl. It was the most gorgeous thing.
Where did she buy the bike?
She bought it used, I know that, but probably at the bicycle shop, probably at Earhart's in town.
Which was the Western Auto Store.
Yeah, and that's probably where she got it. It was a used bike, but it was beautiful. And so I went from the end of my freshman year to the start of my sophomore year. This is another very significant thing to me personally. I went from 152 pounds down to 118 pounds. I went from 4'11" and a half to 5'5" and a half. And David Caraway decided he had a crush on me. He would, he must have had his driver's license. Remember that little gray truck he used to run around in, primer gray, that little tiny truck with a little tiny bed. I'd go get on the bike to go pay bills or to go visit Kathy Clark, because Kathy Clark and I were such good friends then. And there he is. He's always behind me, going 5 miles an hour just to stay behind me. And so Kathy Clark had a beginning of sophomore year. She had a start of school party at her house. And David was invited, and I was invited. And about halfway through the party, David comes up to me and gives me a little white box about 6 inches long, about 2 inches wide, and about 1 inch deep. And he says, "Here, I have a present for you." And this is David. I opened the box, and he had taken, as Paul Harvey would say, now for the rest of the story. potential scam.
Can you stop it?
Yeah. There we go.
I tried to pause, but we weren't able to pause it.
Oh, I
So
should have kept it there. So at any rate, so as Paul Harvey would say, now for the rest of the story. So I opened the box, and in it he had a cat turd with rhinestones in it. That's David Caraway.
So in his later life, what became of David?
David in his later life, okay, when I was that same summer, no, it was the next summer, I think, between my sophomore and junior year, he had a crush on me that whole time. And I went down to Tempe Beach, and I rode my bike down to Tempe Beach and had my little beach bag and my beach towel, and I laid it out. And I went to the diving board to dive off, and Buell was on one side of the pool, and David was on the other side of the pool in the deep end. And as I dove off, they dove in, and they held me underwater. And they held me underwater. They each took a leg and an arm, and they had me, whatever you call it. And I remember letting out my last breath. My life didn't flash before me, but I remember saying to myself, this is it. So I woke up on the side of the pool, on my beach towel. All these people are standing around staring at me, and I got up, got my beach bag, got my beach towel, went and got on my bike, and I've never put my head underwater since.
Well, David, in later life,
Oh yeah.
what happened?
He OD'd on drugs, and it was in the summer, and he did it in the family house. And I knew his brother Jimmy, and Jimmy was really mad. Jimmy once told me, I didn't see Jimmy much, but I saw him one time when he was, I guess, an adult, and he was upset with his parents because he said they made him take psychiatric or counseling or something. And he said, there's nothing wrong with me, but they wanted to prevent it in case he was like David.
Well, what I was getting to is David walked around town for many years as having been drug addicted and addled by this. He was the man walking up and down the street, waving his arms, talking to himself, in a psychotic state.
Yeah.
And he was, everybody in Tempe knew who David was. It was unfortunate because he was a very smart young man.
Oh, he was brilliant.
And the drugs really did a bad thing for him. Okay, so now you're in your sophomore year, you're riding a bike and you've lost your weight, and the boys are starting to hang around, and you're still working.
Boys didn't have time to hang around because I didn't have time.
Didn't have time. Okay.
Yeah.
So now when you were delivering the bills for your
Mom.
mother, your father's now gone.
Oh yeah.
So what was that? What were the businesses that you had to frequent?
Like I said, mainly I just remember the APS. I had to do electrical somewhere. I had to do the telephone, but it's only because I just go in, pay the bill, and leave. Where see, Mr. Ziegler always took me kind of under his wing.
Mr. Ziegler,
Yeah,
and
Ken
that was
Ziegler.
at APS.
Yes.
Is that Hugo's Ziegler?
Yes.
Not is that
No,
Lou?
not Ziegler. Come on. Yeah, Bobby Ziegler. Bobby not
Ziegler.
Zappa. Yeah, it was Bobby Ziegler, not Hugo
Okay,
Zappa.
not Hugo.
It was Bobby Ziegler, and he had a sister. God, I can picture her. She lives down in Marana, and married Scott. At any rate, yeah, it was Mr. Ziegler. He took me kind of under his wing. He always, I don't know why, but he always would come out, and he was always very nice to me, asking me things, and that's why I remember paying the APS bills. So.
Okay, so Mill Avenue was kind of the center of town, and that's
Right.
where the center of the social life.
Yes,
Did you ever roller skate at the roller derby?
didn't have time.
And you didn't go to the pool very much, especially after that episode
That was
with.
the last time at the pool.
And the pool was, an active center. All right, so you get through high school. I suppose you should tell the story about how you went to a dance one night.
Oh, can we go back to grammar school? There was another.
Sure, you can do whatever you want.
Very, very important. Okay. When we came to Tempe the second time and my father was running that Fireside restaurant on Apache Boulevard. We lived on the highway, and behind us was a canal, an open field, a canal. Nakatso Farms were over on 8th Street, and in between there was lemon and orange, and they were starting to build a subdivision. And so there was wood laying around and cement bags and just all kinds of stuff. And that area is plagued with scorpions. Well, we learned to catch scorpions, my two brothers and I. And we would catch just enough scorpions. If they were 2 inches or bigger, we could take them to Dr. Stonky, and he would pay us a nickel. If they were under 2 inches, then he would pay us a penny. Well, we went out and we would only get the 2-inch ones because we would get just enough money, go trade them in, go to College Theater. It cost 11 cents to get in, and we would get enough to buy I always had juicy fruits or jujubes. I can't remember what my brothers did. And then eventually we got to where we were catching even more. We figured, well, if they'll pay us that, they'll pay us more. So we started catching even more and taking them in. And we made the Phoenix Gazette. And we had bought my mom a vacuum cleaner with the money we were buying. We didn't spend it on ourselves. And so then what happened was, all of a sudden, we went from earning big bucks down to just pennies again. The college kids said, hey, we got these dumb little kids coming in here selling us these scorpions, and Dr. Stonky gives us 5 points for those 2 inches over and 1 point under. So they started trading us their under 1 inch for our big 2-inchers. And so the last time we ever caught scorpions for them, it rained and poured. And so we went out after the rain, and we went into where they were building those houses on Lemon and Orange, and we went back there, and we caught 1,800 of them, and we put them in a glass, 1-gallon glass pickle jar. And I always ask people when I tell them this story, I said, do you know how much room 1,800 scorpions take up? Oh, I don't know, blah, blah. They only take up about 4 or 5 inches because they lay so flat on each other. So after we did that, and my brothers weren't interested, then a family named Beach from Phoenix saw us in the Phoenix Gazette, and they got in touch with us. And they said, hey, we want you to catch scorpions for us, because they were in the scorpion, they were putting them in paperweights and belts and earrings and
jewelry.
Jewelry, yes. And so at any rate, we were making good money. And so both my brothers were able to buy themselves new bikes, and they left the scorpion business and went to doing the paper Phoenix Gazette with Ira Fulton. And in fact, when my brother broke his leg, I had to take over his paper route to boot and do all the collecting and everything. And so the Beaches then, they would pay us if we could get them a scorpion that had just had babies. Most people don't realize they give live birth. And when the babies are born, Jerry Stonky and I later in life became very good friends. In fact, I have a book, he gave me a book that his father wrote. And I felt very privileged about that because he only had 2 or 3 copies left. And so he said, I wish you and my father could have gotten together. He says, you know so much that he didn't really know. But when the mother gives birth to the babies, they look like little egg yolks, and their little egg yolks, they climb on her back, and they look like little egg yolks for 1 week, and after a week, then they look like miniature little adult scorpions, and if any of them fall off, she doesn't want them. And so what happened was, the Beaches, they wanted those babies for earrings and what do you call those necklaces, Indian necklaces? Turquoise.
Squash blossoms.
Squash blossoms. They would make scorpion squash blossoms. And so they needed the little ones. So my brothers were gone with their paper routes, and that left me. And so I would go over to by the Walls' a farm, and there was a canal that had big, huge cottonwoods. And cottonwoods sometimes fall over and everything. So every spring I'd go over there, not every, I only did it for 2 or 3 years, would go over there and you take a weed digger and knock out a chunk of dirt in the spring, and there's all these scorpions there. And I would go through them, and if they weren't pregnant, I didn't keep them. I could turn them over and tell if they were pregnant or not. And I kept all the pregnant ones. Well, this is the part that fascinated Jerry Stonke, was that I found if they give birth in late spring, they'll have about 50 babies. And as the summer goes on, and they usually, after September, they usually don't give birth, but as the summer goes on, they give less and less babies. So by September, they only have like 10 babies or something, smaller amount. And so at any rate, they were paying me 10 cents for each one. So if a mother had 50 babies and they only wanted it when the babies looked like adult whatever. So it usually took a week. And so I'd get $5 for one scorpion loaded with babies. And that's a lot of money for a teenager. But here's the other part. I kept it in our storeroom in the campus homes. I built shelves in our storeroom, and back then, instead of Tupperware, women had glass jars with glass lids for leftover. Well, and so what I do is every Saturday morning, before Mom went to work, I would go in there and I didn't do it on purpose, I just had to get it all done. I'd go in there and I would take all these things out one by one. I would check each pregnant scorpion, and if I thought she was near delivery, I would isolate her, because I didn't want her losing any babies and then there's somebody else eating them. So every Saturday morning, I had a regiment that were, for about an hour, I would check all my scorpions to see if they were ready to give birth. One summer, I made $300. I think it was my junior summer. I made $300 just from baby scorpions.
And this is 1957, which was a lot of money for a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Again, every answer has a lot of questions to unpack. You're the first person to mention Dr. Stonke, okay? And he was an Arizona State College professor.
Yes.
And he did research with scorpions and trying to develop a serum.
Right, he used to milk them, as they said. And what he would do is, he had a kind of like a glass jar or glass, and he would take the scorpion and they would take its tail over the deal and make the scorpion give its poison down into it. I saw them do it, yeah. And
do you know where Dr. Stonke lived?
Yes, he lived on Hudson and just on the west side of Mill.
Okay.
And on the south side of Hudson.
Right.
And his gates, he had iron gates or wrought iron gates that had scorpions on them.
And then his son, Jerry, as you describe him, he became a lawyer here in town.
Yes, he did.
Okay. And he's passed just recently.
No, he died January 10th, 2016.
Yeah, some years ago.
And I have to tell you about him. He was awesome. He was a very good friend of my last husband, Carl. And we used to what happened was, Jerry was a criminal lawyer. For 50 years, he practiced criminal law. And one morning, he went down to Phoenix. He had a case before a judge. He went in and put his stuff on the conveyor belt for security. And the security guard said to him, "This is me relaying to you personally what he told me." At any rate, he laid his stuff down, and the security guards looked at him and they said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, I have a 9 o'clock case before Judge so-and-so." And they said, "Do you know what time it is?" They said, "It's 5 in the morning." He quit right then and there, being a criminal lawyer. He had been 50 years. And so what happened was, and I was with Jerry probably almost to his end. Jerry got the same disease, if you want to say dementia, that his father had.
Yeah.
And it was, which one is it? It'll come to me. At any rate, and
Louis Body?
huh?
Louis Body is one of them. Well, there's several.
Yeah, no, it'll dawn on me.
Okay.
In fact, at any rate, he, in fact, it's the one I think our president may have. So at any rate, but Jerry's progressed fast.
Right.
And he was very realistic about it. He had a townhouse down on, I think it was McClintock and Guadalupe. He sold that immediately and went into staying in one of these care facilities. He had, where they had about 5 different people. And he progressed fast. And his son Jay is a personal friend. Haven't seen Jay for a while. Anyway, he didn't last but maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
And he
was a Tempe boy also.
Yes.
Right.
And during that time of his illness, we took him out. He loved Mexican food and he loved Baskin Robbins.
So what class was he in? What year
He
did
was
he graduate?
class of 53.
So he was a little older.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now your English class, you mentioned Sherman Axel, whose dad was...
A doctor, a very liberal doctor, because he was one of the few that did abortions in town.
Okay. When abortions were not legal.
Right.
Okay, so there was also part of the medical. Who were the doctors in town? Do you remember?
Yeah, there was Dr. Westerveld, Dr. Axel, Dr. Flynn, for medical doctors that I remember, and then there was Dr. Yount for dentists that I remember.
Okay. Tommy Hughes.
Oh yeah, Dr. Hughes.
And
Yes.
Dr. Payne.
Oh yes, yes.
And Dr. Irvine was gone by the time.
That one I don't know.
There was a Seventh-day Adventist hospital as well.
Yes, Tempe Community Clinic, I think, Tempe Community Hospital.
And then that became what is now
St. Luke's.
St. Luke's. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So your high school years are busy. You're not going to talk about how you invited somebody to a dance, are you?
Oh yeah, my I guess it was it my senior year, I guess, yes, because the boy I invited was a junior, and I had never, I couldn't participate in school activities because I had to be home at 4 o'clock, and if I did want to go to a football game or a basketball game, I had to take the younger kids in tow. And so I usually didn't, because Friday night was the night that I would always do all the laundry on Saturday, and then do all the ironing on the next Friday night. And so that's why I didn't go to football games usually. And so at any rate, I was in GAA, but I had to be home at 4 o'clock. Well, my senior year, there were 6 of us girls that were up for a GAA princess or something. And I had to attend. And I remember I went out and bought a gown or something. And there was this one junior boy who had always never called me names, who had always been very nice, and he made me feel comfortable. And so I asked him if he would take me.
And who was that?
Bill Loughrige. That's how you got picked.
That's how I got picked.
Yeah, and I have to tell you something. You know Bill Steffen.
Yeah.
Years after we got out of high school, he one time told me, which made me feel good. He said, out of all the people in our class, which there were about 100 girls, he said, you're the ugly duckling, which I did not take negatively.
No, of course, because the ugly duckling became the song.
Yeah, because when I went back to school, when that happened to me, between my freshman and sophomore year, and I lost all that weight and grew that much, I entered, my locker was in Unit 4, and Barbara Wall was with me. Excuse me, because Barbara and Bill Steffen, they were my neighbors in campus homes. And we entered Unit 4 to go to my locker, and everybody just stopped and stared. It was like, Barbara says, it was like, I don't know, You were a different person. Yeah.
Visually.
And nobody.
Well, I'm going to transition here a little bit, because I'm going to go into your adult life now, and if it's okay. Right?
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
I'm going
okay.
to expand on our relationship. We went to this dance, but really, you've been part of my life
Yeah,
because you went to Arizona State College, I think,
Right.
and you became a teacher.
right.
And you were teaching at what school?
Oh my God, I
Well,
taught on
you ended up
animal.
at Conley.
Yeah, I ended up at Gilliland.
Gilliland.
My
How
last
did you know Millie?
Wherever she was at, kid. Because, okay, first I did all the schools. I applied and I didn't get hired. And I even subbed at Getz because I got along with the kids so well, even though I didn't have a special ed degree. I loved working there with those kids.
Okay.
At any rate, so Sam Feast saw me one time in one of these classes, subbing there, and he says, "What are you doing here?"
Well,
And
Sam Fees had become now the superintendent of schools.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he said, "What are you doing here?" And this was at Carminati. I'll never forget because Doris Cornett was the principal. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm subbing." And he says, "You should be working full time." And he says, "Why aren't you?" I said, "I didn't get hired." He said, "I'm going to go find out what." Half my file was missing.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately, I was hired and I was put out at Frank and taught out there for half a year, still on not contracted salary, but whatever. And then from there, from Frank, I went to from Frank I went to rural school. It closed. I was there 1 year. Then I went to Arredondo. I think I went to Arredondo. From Arredondo, I went to Conley. From Conley, I went to Gilliland, I think.
Okay, well, was that your tenure at Conley is when you met Millie,
Yes,
and that reestablished our relationship. After,
she was an
after
awesome
school.
lady.
She was
the most feminine of any woman PE teacher I ever ran into. She was.
okay. So you had a career as a teacher. Did you retired?
Yeah,
Did you retire?
yeah.
And then you also had a marriage. You mentioned it earlier to Mike Grabnewski. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And you married him, and you had a child.
Yes.
Yes. But that marriage didn't last,
He
right?
was very.
Because he was abusive as your father was.
Extreme.
Okay.
He was worse than my father,
Right.
and he was a child abuser too.
Sure. Okay.
And I found
So-
out when my son's body was covered in bruises from his cowboy belt.
Right. Okay. And then the tragedy is that you lost your son.
Yes.
Okay. So you're now single,
Yes.
and you remarried.
Well, wait, what happened? Okay, I divorced Mike, and down the street from me, on La Rosa and Broadmoor, lived Joe Clark. And he
Now, is this Joe Clark related to Kathy?
Kathy Clark, first cousins, Ken Clark, the insurance agent,
Yes.
and so he'd be going by my house all the time to go down to his office. His office was on Broadway, across the street from the Broadmoor, a salon, haircutting, barbershop. And so he'd go by, and this went on. I don't know. I didn't pay attention to it. And I'm happily divorced, very content, could support myself well, and my son and I had a great thing going. And
What was that you had going with your son?
in fact, when he was in junior high, when most kids don't own their parents or whatever, he used to always take me everywhere because he thought I was a great
Okay.
parent. And
Did you have a business with him?
No,
Okay.
never did.
Well,
So
there's something else that during these years of your high school and grade school, who was in your life that was influential? And you've mentioned Sam Fees.
yes,
Who else had an influence in your life?
Mrs. Hurley, because of her statement. That she was probably the most influential. There were a lot of teachers I liked very much, but because of what she said to me about my term papers, really made me realize that I was pretty smart, and I don't know, really, I needed that type of deal. See, who else was influential? Well, to tell you the honest truth, because I went from being a kid to being an adult so fast, I didn't have a lot of people who came into my life. I'll be honest with you, Bill.
No, I understand that. But there are people around you that have moved you through your life. Sam Fees, for one.
Sam was, until, and I got upset with him, and I told him I was upset with him. When I married Joe Clark, so Joe kept going by my house, and finally one night, he said, oh, I love he loved plants, and he loved the things, shrubberies and everything. Finally one night he came to my house at 8 o'clock, and he says, I haven't eaten dinner yet, you want to go have some Mexican food? And that's how we wound up getting married. And so when I married Joe, Sam Fees found out about it immediately. And I was at Gilliland, and he came over there, and he says, I need to talk to you. He says, I understand you married Joe, and he says, I want you to do me a favor. And I said, sure. He says, I want you to keep an eye on Beth Clark, because he said, I know she's an abused woman. And I looked at him, and I said, what are you talking about, Ken? I said, if anybody's abused, it's Ken Clark. He was shocked when I told him that. Beth Clark has the most...
Was Joe Ken's son?
Yes.
Okay.
And Beth Clark, I mean, she was just the glory of Tempe, because she could send the most beautiful...
So how long have the Clark family been in Tempe?
Okay, that's one of the things I was going to show you about. They've been, okay, Ken has been here virtually his whole life. He was conceived in Tempe in about 1905 or he was born in 06, and I can't remember his birth date right now. But he was conceived in Tempe when when his mother was 6 months along with him. She went back to to Fort Dodge, Kansas, where she came from, because I just found this out doing research for you and looking through some of my files. Joe Clark had an older brother. Ken Clark had an older brother named Alva, A-L-V-A, and he died in infancy. So when she got pregnant with Ken, she didn't want to give birth to him in our territory, because in 1906, Arizona was still a territory. Mm-hmm. So she went back to Kansas by stagecoach, gave birth to Ken. When he was 6 weeks old, she brought him back to Tempe. And so he's been here since 1906, or he was, whatever.
Do you know where they lived?
Yes. There was let me remember. There was a little white house where the Tempe Mill Avenue post office is. It would be kind of where the alley is now. And there was a little white house, and that was the house that they lived in, right there. At 5th and Mill, actually. And that became Joe's first childhood home. And Joe was born in one of the maternity hospitals on McAllister. There were 2 maternity hospitals in Tempe in the 1930s. And he was born in one of the 2 maternity.
Do you know where they were, what the address was by chance?
I don't know the address, I just know they were on McAllister.
Okay. And
he was born in one of those. And then from there, Joe...
With a midwife, I take
it. More than likely, yes, absolutely. Okay. So from there...
What year, what was Joe's birthday?
Joe was born in 1932, okay. January 20th. And so from there, they moved from that little white house, which was Ken's childhood home too, and they moved from there to 10th Street, 10th and Mill. There used to be a house in what was the parking lot of what we know as the Dairy Queen and now as a sandwich shop. There was a house there, and they moved into that house. And then when he was in that, and then after high school graduation, he went into the Navy, and his parents built that beautiful home in Date Palm Manor.
Okay.
So that was Joe's, and here's what I was researching for you. So Ken, I don't know, I have have the whole lineage for Ken's family. Like I said, he had an older brother, Alva, that died, I don't know, a few months old. And then he had a brother, Art Clark, who, Arthur B, I think is his middle initial, Clark, who was a Tempe High science teacher and also the school photographer who took all of our pictures for the annual. You remember Art Clark?
I do.
Yeah, that's...
And how is he related?
They're brothers.
I'll be darned.
And Art is Kathy and Nancy and Marjorie and Susie's father.
Okay. So you and Joe were married in what year?
1992. And we got married Valentine's Day because then he said he couldn't forget it. And we were married for 10 years until he died of cancer.
What was his business?
He was in the insurance business with his father. This was interesting. He was in the insurance business with his father, and he really, when he got back from the Navy, between Dr. Lopiano and his mother, his life, he had no control in his life. They controlled his life. He wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to go to ASU. He would have made an awesome doctor. Had real good bedside manner, and honest to God, there isn't a word in this world that he doesn't know. He knows every word in the dictionary. And I mean, he was just awesome, very bright. And he wanted to be a doctor, but his mother didn't want him to be a doctor. She wanted him to be a lawyer. So he became a lawyer, went to ASU, got his degree, he was in charge of the whatever you do to write the big book for senior year and everything. And he didn't like being a lawyer because he could not, this is exactly his words, he could never represent somebody he knew was guilty or found out he was guilty. He said he couldn't do that. So he went into real estate. And he taught other lawyers how to buy properties on back taxes. That's what he did. Mm-hmm. And so at any rate, when he did get back from the Navy, he had gotten a beautiful, beautiful, I have a picture of it, a dragon tattoo. Yeah, he served in the submarines and different places like that. I think probably doing more of the electronic, maybe, I don't know what, well, that's kind of getting in your area. And so he came home with this beautiful dragon on his right arm, and his mother grabbed him and took him down and had somebody remove that dragon, and they took the flesh off of his thigh to do a graft there. I'll never forget, because this was a very rough, and you could tell both of those. So at any rate, he became a lawyer, and he, like I said, the only thing that made him happy was doing the back taxes. He got to run all over the state. I don't think there's a back road he didn't know. And then he wound up with cancer. And
but after you married him, you ended up in Superior, right?
Yeah, he had bought a lot of properties up there on back taxes. And so I'd never been to Superior. I only went through it when we were in high school, and maybe you would remember because you were on the basketball team, remember? Yep. And when I was my class, now I don't know, you're only a year younger. Did you guys play basketball with up there in Miami at the gym way up on the hill? Okay. Well, because I was such a responsible adult as a teenager, everybody used to let their kids go with, I think about it now and I go, oh my God, I used to go down that little, up there at night, down those crazy roads that were so narrow, up there where the mountains, the rocks fall off, but everybody here to let their kids go with me, and I drove because number one, I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, and I was responsible.
And you had a car.
And I had a car. And we used to go up to that gym where you guys played basketball, and then afterward we'd go over to Guayos del Rey by the swimming pool on Sullivan there. I don't know if being on the basketball team you got that experience. There's an awesome Mexican restaurant there called Guayos del Rey
in Miami.
In Miami on Sullivan, across from the YMCA pool. Anyway, so we'd go get Mexican food. And I don't remember if I saw you on the team or whatever, because that's one of the experiences I did get to get away, because by then would trust Terry at home alone. He was the youngest of them. And so at any rate, I don't know how we got off on that one.
Well, I think we're just recanting our history and things, and each question, each answer sparks more answers, more questions.
Well, do you ever want to know how I got to why some of you call me Marguerite and some of you still call me Betty?
You did that.
No, I didn't.
No.
When we were seniors, because I was at the year at Tempe High, I don't know how they did it for you, but for in my deal, they took our files, and because I was in the pre-college prep, my files got sent over to ASU. And I didn't have to go through a bunch of registration because they had everything there on me. And on my files, Tempe High had me registered as Marguerite Elizabeth still, but you guys all called me Betty because of junior high. And when you came to Tempe High, because you were one of those little snotty kids that went to the pain training school, at any rate, you were introduced to me as Betty. You know, or I was introduced to you. So you called me Betty.
It took me years to not call you Betty.
You can call me, but I don't. There's certain people that refuse to do it. Refuse.
Yeah, right.
So at any rate, my very first college class was BF 101. And we're sitting there, it was right after lunch, and this will be interesting too. All of Cush's the professor was a little tiny guy, Professor Emeritus from Iowa. And it was right after lunch. And so Cush put all of his football players in that class because he was a visiting professor and they would get the passing grade. So here we are, after lunch, and he had us in two semicircles. And he's up there at the podium and he calls on Marguerite. And in the meantime, here's Cush's boys with their heads down, but they were filled with lunch and they went to sleep and snoring at that. So at any rate, he calls on Marguerite, and I remember sitting there thinking, and I can remember I was in the second row near the door, and I thought, God, I wish that person would answer. This class is so boring. And I'm looking up, counting the holes in the ceiling. Then all of a sudden it dawned on me. My name was Marguerite. I went back to Marguerite right then and there because that was the beginning of the computer age, and computers didn't give a damn if you had a nickname.
Yeah.
And so that was the birth of Marguerite again.
Ah, okay.
And you know how I found out I wasn't Elizabeth? When I went to get a passport, and I filled it in for Marguerite Elizabeth, and they sent it back. There's no such person. And I quizzed them, so I had to go get a recent birth certificate, and that's how I found out I was only Marguerite. And then you want to know why my name is Marguerite? I was born in a hospital in New Jersey, and my father insisted I be named Marguerite, and my mother wanted my name to be Charlene, and he said she's got to have a name but Marguerite. And so my godmother's name was Marguerite, and at 6 months old I was baptized Marguerite, and she died when I was 2, my mother told me. And that was my father's last girlfriend before he married my mother. And so when I was in 2nd grade, there was a little boy named Frankie. He had a crush on me, and he would come and he was a kleptomaniac. He tried to give me stolen pencils and erasers and oh God. And I'd be like this with my hands behind my back because I wouldn't take any of that stuff. And so, you know how kids are when they got crushes on somebody. So he nicknamed me Maggots. So I went home, told my parents, never going back to school again, I'm done. And my mother took me by my hand, took me to school, and said, call her by her middle name, Elizabeth. And then it wasn't until I went to get a passport I found out I didn't have a middle name of Elizabeth either.
Interesting days, huh?
Yeah.
Well, we've been doing this for more than an hour, Marguerite, and we were just getting into your marriage with Joe. And I'm going to summarize real quickly, and then we can come back maybe if you're open to this.
Are you up to lunch? Can
Yeah, we can do lunch, but right now we're
Okay.
gonna just do this.
Okay.
Because I want people to understand, you know, your high school and grade school years, your grade school years, you were bullied, and you know you had a tough life as a high school student, and now here you are. You married Joe. You had a very successful marriage with him. You had a very successful business life with him. You own, how many properties do you own?
Okay, let's back up. I married Joe. And Joe kept his business life, everything about it, totally separate. I had no idea what it was about. The only time he ever involved me was when he was writing a letter to some other attorneys, because I can say, and I don't talk that way, but when it comes to writing, I can say in one page what he would say in two.
Right.
So he would call me to take a word processor and audit his letters. That is all I knew about Joe and his properties until 7 days after he died.
Oh my God.
Because I had properties, I had rentals, 4 rentals in Mesa. I had my own properties, I had my own bank account. I didn't know bank accounts until 7 days after he died. I found 4 bank accounts. One was the trust and one was whatever. I had my own little bank account. I had my rentals to take care of. I was still teaching and the rest of that. And I had the last years at Gilman were some really interesting years. And so at any rate, our business lives never crossed.
Okay.
And I'll give you a Paul Harvey so you can ask me some other time, rest of the story. This will be funny. He died 7 days after he died. Oh, I know, 2 weeks before he died. He said, I apologize for buying all those properties in Superior. He says, but you're smart, you're going to figure it out. And that's all he ever said to me. He died. 7 days after he died. Oh God, you're right, I've been so through, people tell me I should write a book. I thought, my God, I got to go in that office. I got to figure this out. I had no idea. And when I walked into the office, there were 4 file cabinets, 4 drawers high, 3 of them were legal size, 3 feet deep. 1 was standard, and it was 3 feet deep, so I had 16 file drawers, all stuffed. There were 40 Xerox boxes sitting there with all kinds of records filled, not banker's boxes, they're smaller. And then all around the room, piles and piles and piles of manila folders. I sat down in his desk chair and started to cry. There was nobody to help me. I didn't know what in the hell it was about. I was faced with a $2.5 million lawsuit. I can't remember what else. There were lawsuits I had to finish out. I mean, that's another story. And there was Mayo Clinic, because of his cancer, he had a $22,500 bill, and they want to be paid like yesterday, and they don't give you a discount. And I looked at the checkbooks. I was as poor as a church mouse. I couldn't even go to McDonald's. I was that damn poor. And I sit there crying. And then all of a sudden, Barbara Stanwyck came to mind. I saw this movie, Western movie sometime. Barbara Stanwyck was sitting on a bed about this height, old 1800s bed. And she had on a beautiful doe-skin skirt, beautiful gold blouse that had three buttons. And she had on a doe-skin vest that matched the skirt. And she reached over by the bed, picked up a boot, came over here and went, eh! Picked up the other boot and went, eh! I have put those boots on. I have put those boots on every morning since Joe's death. That's how I've gotten by. And now I figured it out all by myself. Not one person has ever approached me and said, Marguerite, can I help you? Is there anything I can do? And I figured it all out. I've gone from being somebody that couldn't even go to McDonald's to now I'm in not need or want of anything. And I still have some properties in Superior, which are probably still a fair amount.
Okay, Marguerite, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, we'll probably have to do some more because there's lots of questions that come up. And I appreciate your time, taking your time to do this.
Let's go to lunch.
We will go and have lunch.
Yeah, let's
And
go to Man Wells. Man Wells a few years ago, after Carl died, got to be and then I have the girl that painted I've got a couple.
okay, well, I'm gonna end this recording because you're gonna start talking about personal stuff.
Oh.
All right, thanks, Marguerite.